All right, good morning, everyone. It is Wednesday, October 6th, and this is the work session of the Board of Supervisors regarding our space needs assessment. As many of you know, that we are looking at the space that we currently have and how to better utilize it or how to meet the needs of Story County. Before I turn it over to the folks to do their presentation, I know Joby wanted to make a couple comments.
Yep. Good morning, everybody. These folks in OPN have a lot of information to present to the board, so I think that if we just let them present to the board and then take our questions at the end, we're gonna cover a lot of, it might answer your questions throughout the day, but everybody should see the overview of what's taken covered, so that way the board asks their questions and then the rest of us ask questions. Thank you.
Right, and just to say, because I just want to show everybody on Zoom for you, Joby, so we're just asking everybody, we're going to hold our questions to the end until after OPN has done their presentation. Some of the questions may be answered, so we'll make sure we get to that at the end of their presentation. With that, I will turn it over.
All right, great. Well, thank you for being here this morning. We're excited to share some of this with you. For those of you, I think we've met everybody in the room here at some point, but OPN Architects, our team here, Brett Mendenhall, Maddie Bainey, Anna Marie Snyder, and myself, Danielle Herman. So with that, I'm going to let Brett take us through the agenda and dive into the content.
Right. Thank you, everybody. We appreciate your time this morning. The agenda is up there on the screen, sort of gives you an overview of the buildings in the order that we're going to try and address them. I would like to say that on September 3rd, we met with the Board of Supervisors and delivered sort of our summary of our findings. So going through the buildings, we sort of gave an overview of the issues that we found and that we heard from the various department heads. Today's report is like a continuation of that. We've taken our first pass at trying to synthesize the problems and suggesting some potential solutions. We're thinking of this as like a 75% milestone. Daniel will talk about the next step here shortly. So it's not the final report. It's sort of an initial sort of test run of some things, some initial findings to get everything going. So in our findings, I think it's fair to say that almost all the buildings we looked at, or all the buildings we looked at, are overcrowded. We were able to find pockets of space in every building that are less efficient or underutilized, but in almost all cases, there isn't enough of those spaces to make wholesale department shifts and to do big reorganization or allow for any one department that is experiencing any real level of growth. The exception to that is the Human Services building in Ames. So I think it's kind of a logical thing to begin to think about. In order to solve some of your problems, we're going to have to consider finding ways to move some people from some locations or some departments or some activities from one location to the other to make the best advantage of the one building that does have large areas of swing space. And we'll get to that a little bit later. We're going to start with some of the buildings that house, singular departments or smaller groups that can be treated more as a individual project that aren't so co-related with moving people back and forth between buildings. So we'll go through we kind of sort of think of it as sort of a standalone project or standalone buildings first, and then we'll get into more complicated domino kind of scenarios where we have to move people around amongst buildings to make things work. And in some of those cases, it's not like one solution. Some there are mutual exclusive solutions. We might have several different scenarios of people that could move, but we can't move everybody. So it's at some point, we'll go through options and talk about different pluses and minuses to those scenarios. And the last thing I'd like to point out is this is an assessment study. So it's this big picture, it's big blocks of space. Eventually, when some strategies are right as being the most amenable or the things that make the most sense, you'll eventually hire design professionals to do real design, real building designs. So we aren't diving into where every office goes, where every conference room goes. We have looked at it in a way that we feel confident that the amount of space we're looking at is the correct amount of space. We aren't diving into super detail on how to actually design each of those blocks of space. So Any quick questions to the process and overview? Great. With that, I'm going to turn over to Maddie, who will dive into some of the buildings in a more detailed fashion. The narrative is really the text. Today, you get to see the pictures that go with the narratives.
So for all of these buildings and schemes, what we'll do first is go through the high level observations and kind of some of the problems that we heard about and saw in each of the buildings, and then we'll go through some of the possible solutions. So for the first building, our first building is conservation. We heard that the staff spaces are extremely overcrowded. There's multiple staff in each of the offices. As for the auditorium space, it doesn't really function how they would like it to function. They can only have one group of students at a time due to the space and weather conditions. So I'd really like to see that space broken up into possibly more classroom spaces. The storage as it is adequately sized, but it's very hard to access. They have to use a narrow stairway to get into the basement. There's no ADA access into it. The existing restrooms do not meet fixture counts or ADA. And if we were to add an addition or a new building on the site, the current HVAC and systems are maxed out, so we would have to modify those. So for the first option we have, it would be creating an addition onto the building off of the office area in order to create more space for employees. In that space, we would also add unisex restrooms for the employees so that they don't have to use the same restrooms as the students. We would also turn the auditorium space into classrooms of approximately 30 in size, and we would expand the restrooms in order to meet ADA counts. We would also use the existing topography on site to help us create another basement storage access point from the exterior in order to easier take things out of storage. So that's the first option. For option B, we would be looking at doing a completely new standalone building, but have it be in close proximity to the existing building. That's where all the staff offices, restrooms, workroom would be. And then we would just use the existing building for classroom space and workroom space for students. In this scheme, we would also look at expanding the restrooms in order to meet ADA. And we would move the storage to underneath the new building in order to provide that easier access to the storage. So that's what we have for conservation.
Maybe one quick note on conservation, while we're demonstrating it sort of at the northwest corner there, that location is not intended to be specific. It could be kind of anywhere on that northwest side. We would need to study the site more specifically as to the exact location. This is just referencing that it is standalone.
Steve, there's one thing I forgot to mention. The bullet points that we're going through today are the more significant of the bullet points. Our prior report was a little more comprehensive. So if you're worried about some things that you've talked to us about in the past that aren't showing up, it might be that try to condense those bullet points today to major issues. The prior report had a much more comprehensive and extensive list.
All right, on to the engineer building. So the engineer building itself functions pretty well as is. There were some minor issues. Currently, the open office space for the engineers is a little oversized, and IRVM's open office space is a little tight. There's also some noise issues from IRVM into the engineers space and reception/lobby. These restrooms also do not meet ADA. And there were some issues with the exterior walls lacking insulation, which was creating very cold spaces on the north side in the winter. So for this building, we really only have one option. We'd look at switching the open office engineer space and IRBM to create a more condensed and engineer space and just make sure all of that is in proximity with each other. And by separating IRBM, solve some of those noise issues. We'd also be extending the restrooms into the kitchenette and moving the kitchenette into the break room, and then just creating a small workroom off of that. Also, just a note, this plan just solves some of the current issues they have, but if engineers did need to expand at any point and hire new employees, we would have to look at doing some sort of addition or moving IRBM out of the building.
Can I interrupt for just a second and
Yes.
ask what MEPT stands for?
Mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and technology. It basically just refers to the systems in the building.
Okay, thank you.
All right, and then animal control. So animal control, the building is generally in pretty good condition, but we did notice some inefficiencies. The entry lobby space kind of intermingles with the office space, which creates some kind of odd programming. And there's kind of this like break room area that's also in the lobby space, which is kind of confusing. There's also some issues with visual access into the animal spaces, especially when public are in the animal spaces. And in this building, restrooms also do not meet ADA. So for this building, our option would just be looking at reconfiguring the lobby space and adjusting some of the offices to kind of create more separation. And then also looking at reconfiguring or remodeling some of the animal holding areas to create those visual sight lines. And then I will turn it over to Anna Marie for the next two buildings.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad you're here to join us today. So as Maddie was going through this, we were going through the standalone buildings and not looking at transfers or moves between departments and locations. This is where we start to get a little bit more complicated. So as we were looking at this building that we're in now, we're seeing that we really want to grow here, but we don't have the space to grow. The Human Services Center, as you know, has areas that are underutilized, and that was observation of how maybe we could utilize those spaces and make some moves here to support some of the growth for the departments in this building and keeping them central to innovative. So when we look at this, we're actually going to look at both buildings together a little bit differently. So we'll look at administration building and human services and how that domino affects. So when we move something from this building, our department or office, how it affects the human services building. So we'll go through three options and how that dominoes through. It may get a little bit complicated, so if you guys have questions or anything, just let me know. So first, as I said, with the administration building, we do have departments that want to grow, but one thing that's really important about this building is it's on a generator backup, but it's not a full building backup. It only will supply the EOC, the servers, and I think you've got probably some emergency lighting and egress. The Human Service Center alternately is on complete building backup. So when an event happens or emergency, they can supply the building 100%, your bathrooms, toilets, all of those things will work. So that's one thing to consider when we're looking at these moves. And then as far as the administration building, we do have the restroom fixture counts, again, are not adequate. We're a little short. One of the requests that you guys are aware from the Board of Supervisors is to look to add gender neutral restrooms into all the facilities. And I think that was really the main one. So the administration, human services, and justice center, if I'm correct. So that will help us with the fixture counts, but then we also were looking at some of the restrooms that we do have here and making them a little bit more accessible. As far as the human service center and restrooms, some of the same issues. One thing to note too, we are going to look at the justice center afterwards. There is a couple things that we are considering in these moves with the Justice Center, where we can take some of the functions there and move them to the Human Services Center building in Ames. And then you'll see a little bit of that in this part of the presentation, and later we'll talk about the Justice Center and how that is affected. So moving in first, option A, and we'll start with the administration building that we're in now. This high level, I should probably advance these slides, huh? You don't know what I'm talking about or looking at. So here's option A. We will start with the lower level and move up through the building. First in this option, big picture was to move the emergency management and EOC to the Human Service Center as well as IT. And that goes back to the full generator building backup. The EOC then could have, when they're in the middle of an emergency, they'd actually be able to use restrooms and take showers if they were there for multiple, days on end, as opposed to in this building, those facilities may not be available. And then the IT as well moving, would utilize a generator building backup. They also have a server located there as well. One change here in this option is that we looked at every department and office has their own break room within their department. And the proposal here is to eliminate the department break rooms to give you guys more space within the office and create one common break room per floor. I know there's a larger one on this floor on the basement that we're showing now. We would reduce them in size to give some of that more back to facilities management. One thing with this floor plan, as you see, currently on the east side of the building, environmental health was located. They are disjointed. So, sorry, environmental health. Yeah, environmental health and P&D are disjointed between that corridor. So there are some spaces to the south, their conference room, and we've also got some interns, and they're just not feeling congruent between the spaces. So taking their offices and moving to where IT is currently located, we did do some code analysis and realized that we do have the right number of exits on this floor, so we can eliminate that exit that goes around IT to then make environmental health and P&D one, cohesive department without the corridor splitting their office space. Facilities management stays in the same location. They were requesting additional storage, so we've got a little bit there to take out a break room. One request, high level, from Board of Supervisors, but then also from some of your departments is we're traveling, and as you guys are traveling between Ames and Nevada for meetings, there's not a really good touchdown spot, or hey, I've just got to set down for a meeting. So we utilize this space that's vacated from environmental health to provide some of that flex hoteling space. And lastly, you'll see here, auditor storage has been relocated from this floor that we're on now down to the basement. And part of that has to do with the current elevator that's located here on the north. That is an old elevator, and from what we've heard, it has some issues. And this makes for when we're deploying for elections a lot easier to just get that equipment right out of the building. And it is, it's worked on a remote kind of basis already, so we felt that we could move that to the lower level. Go to the next floor. If we move up the building, you'll see on this floor there's not a lot of changes. What we've heard from Treasurer and Recorder, first they want to be adjacent to one another, but also Treasurer being the probably busiest department in the building, having them located off the main lobby makes sense. So there really wasn't a reason to move these departments. What we're seeing is just, again, inefficiencies in lobby space and how maybe we can reconfigure to be a little bit more efficient. I think that their space is appropriately sized. When we remove the break room from that department, we can really give back a conference room and some more useful space. And that would be said for both the recorder and the treasurer and all these other offices, assessor as well. We'll start to take some of those spaces for break rooms, and we can give it back to those departments so you guys can better utilize it. So for treasurer and recorder, we're just proposing to reconfigure the space. As far as the other side of the building, the east side of the building, mailroom remains. There's no reason to modify that. Assessor, same thing, reconfigure their lobby. I know that that's a sticking point, but also I think understanding their storage a little bit better. It looks like there's some inefficiencies there where we can really condense some of that. Some of this is also in tandem. We heard from you guys about potentially moving to digitizing files. And so understanding if, from a county perspective, if that is something that is, are we hiring a person to do that for all departments, or how you'd like to tackle that? But we understand that some of the storage could be moved digital and give that space back to people as opposed to files. Lastly, we do have a conference room. I know that is utilized by multiple departments. It is the assessor's conference room. We did reduce that and move GIS to be more adjacent to the assessor, and give a smaller conference room that can be used by, again, all departments. You'll see on the next floor plan, and I'll just scroll through because that's where we're going. On the second floor, we then added a conference room and overflow space. So really taking some of that space that we took away from the main floor and adding it up here. We've heard from the board of supervisors and other departments and offices that when there's large events here, I know this is pre-COVID, but when there's large events here, we want people to feel that they're inclusive and part of the space, but we can't accommodate all of them. So having that space somewhere really close and adjacent to this room is very important. Here it is just down the hall. We'll see in other schemes it kind of moves locations. Auditor, as the storage moves to the basement, we can then reconfigure their space to be a little bit more efficient, as well as I think it's a miss here, but the jail has really kind of just been this auxiliary storage area, and there's windows there. We could really utilize some of that light and get some better office space back there. So our proposal would be to relocate some of those offices. We did move auditor finance out of that space. We know that they're adjacent and work together and they need to be next to one another, but we also felt that it made sense to take some of that and give more of that back to the auditor. And that goes into some of our square footage analysis. Break room still in the corner here for the floor. Probably the biggest thing here though is the board of supervisors. So we're in this room right now and their offices are right behind us. They're really landlocked architecturally. If you look at the floor plan, they can't expand anywhere. We have mechanical room, restrooms. We need to maintain this access to this back wall so when they come in for board meetings. So it makes sense, and this is something Human Resources had brought up, was for confidentiality, but also just to separate the departments. There's still the board of supervisors really wants to, and I know you guys want to have Human Resources pretty close. So we did keep them on this floor. And they do have a smaller office, but then that would help with the expansion. I know that you have some staff down here in this space, then you can bring them back into your office and probably look at some of that storage that you've got too much storage in your space. So that is option A for the admin building. Now we'll go to human services and the domino effect that happens. So we'll again start at the lower level. So IT services does move to this level. The servers located here, that's black box you see on the plan. And it just, I mean, that's where they need to be. This is their appropriately sized space. We did look at plumbing and where some of those chases are within the building. So we did locate the unisex or gender neutral restroom on this floor. It's always up for debate about where it really should be located, as this is kind of a back of house floor because we've got emergency management and IT. But we did put emergency management and the EOC down on this level as well. What we heard from them is they really need to be away from the lobby, away from, I mean, they are next to the lobby, but more in a more secure. So right now, you walk down the corridor in this building, if there's something happening, they're going between their offices and the EOC, and public can just walk in. So this would really, they would have a secure entry, and then also could go down this hallway and then come in and out those back doors. As we move up the building. So Department of Human Services, that was an interesting conversation as as we heard from many offices and departments that because you guys serve the public, it's very, very hard for you to work from home. And we completely understand that. being in the environment that we are in. And I think that, given that, DHS is in a maybe more unique situation in that they have implemented a work from home policy. And so with that, we can look at reducing some of their square footage and having a hoteling situation in which, let's say Danielle works in the morning, I work in the afternoon, we could say share the same desk or office. We're also finding that some of the offices were not quite appropriately sized, and so looking at how we could tighten some of that up, as well as they're using a lot of, we've got a lot of cubicles that are being used for storage. So I think just again, being a little bit more conscious of how we're doing storage in the building. So on this floor, Department of Human Services is located on the south, and then Community Services and Veterans Affairs to the north. They both need direct access to the lobby, so they are on the first floor, they're right next to the lobby. They also would have direct access to this back stairwell as needed. Then if we move up the building, we did with the Department of Human Services and how we have this kind of temporary flex work and work from home. We're looking at utilizing the back stairwell and elevator to then put the flex spaces that they may need. So if they, you have someone that only is in office 20% of the time, maybe they just come in and that's where they are. Our understanding is that they're on the phone a lot and processing a lot of files, so it is a lot of heads down work when they're in the office. As well as on this floor, we pulled the court services together. So county attorney does need more space. They're currently located where we're showing DHS. So they get a little bit more space. This also includes moving some of, they have full personnel that want to and need to move to the Justice Center. The big move here, though, is juvenile court services and juvenile court. So what we're proposing is to, and you'll see this happen when we talk about the Justice Center, is to propose moving juvenile court, the actual court in which people come in for hearings, to Ames. And part of that is multifold, but it really comes into juvenile court is, how to explain it. It's, a lot of people come in. It's not just a couple council members. It's families. It's also youth. And so they, transportation is really important, as well as Ames is the population center. So right now, all of your juvenile court services are located in Ames, and the only thing that's located here in Nevada is the courtroom. So all those individuals for each hearing have to travel from Ames to Nevada with lack of public transportation, as well as, again, population centers in Ames. So with that, we're proposing to put the courtroom on the top level of the Human Services building. We did look at appropriately sizing this. There may be some structural considerations as we move forward to talk about that, but we do have them there. The conference room, what we've heard is that people use this touch-on space. So I think this is an added technology we've discussed before. So that was a lot. Want to keep going? Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So option B, there are some similarities, but in this option, we, as opposed to moving IT remains in this building, and we propose moving facilities management to the Human Services building. I'll scroll down.
Anna, do you want to touch on the auditor storage space? And we did it on the last one. We didn't go into that very much. We might have some questions as to why not.
Sure. Okay, so currently auditor storage is located in this area here on this floor. And there's the elevator. As you probably all are aware, there's an addition on this floor to the north where the jail is located. And auditor storage that also occurs across the hall. These spaces are prime real estate spaces for offices. So we took those square footages and moved this storage down to the lower level. You can see this is the drive through. There's the elevator that we saw on the floor above. So right now, our understanding is the auditor, when they need to deploy for elections, are taking all of their rolling carts and everything, all their heavy equipment, moving out, getting the trucks up there and, bringing them to precincts. And so with it being here, we eliminate if the elevator goes down or breaks in the middle of this process or something, they're no longer dependent upon that. They can just roll down the corridor and right outside the building. That's what you're thinking? Yep. Hope that makes sense to everyone. So option B, IT remains in their current location. Again, we do eliminate that back hallway to recapture that circulation for storage and increased office space. So IT services does get a little bit more room in a reconfigured lobby, which is a concern of theirs. Break room, again, we have a break room per floor. In this option, we have auditor moving down to this level, so all functions, including storage, their lobby, everything's below the level. So, and then it's again, like I said, facilities management, they do have, this room back there, but facilities management and EOC again moved to they moved to this. Main floor again, we had the conversation about treasurer recorder, same here. We would just be remodeling those spaces. Mail remains. The conference room that is down there now with the operable partition will remain as is. I think it's just what we were talking about before, upgraded technology. But we did move all, so conferencing and all that area, flex hotel and the break room, all of that kind of activity space would be located on this east side of the first floor. With that, if we move up to the upper floor, Assessor and GIS do move to this floor. Environmental health and planning development, which work with Assessor and GIS, would also be relocated to this floor. We do have, the nice thing about this option is your conference and an overflow space is directly adjacent to this door. So it's right across the hall. And this is opposed to down the hallway. Again, Board of Supervisors, we talked about being landlocked. Human Services moves just around the corner on the other side of the mechanical space. We do maintain a conference and break room here in this corner, and these conference rooms remain. So the nice thing about this option is you do garner some more flex spaces, some more office and conference spaces for this floor, as well as maintaining your first floor conference room before we were breaking it in. So now we're going to sort of see how the domino effect happens. So we have facilities management located on the lower level. This gray box here should be pink. That is the loading dock, as well as there are a couple offices that Joby and his team utilize. So that's actually their area, and they would be directly adjacent to that. Department of Human Services moves to this level. As we have a larger area, we can no longer have them on multiple floors or all on one. We do have the unisex and gender neutral restroom adjacent DHS. And as we move up, we do have emergency management EOC utilizing what I would call the back of house, not main lobby stairwell on the east side of the building. And then community services and veteran affairs, which really wants to be front facing and interact with the public, would be off the main lobby and elevator and stair. And then the upper level is pretty similar, the same as what we discussed before. The only difference is instead of DHS occupying that back area, that becomes a flex space. And that would be directly adjacent county attorney, which they do have, some work back and forth between Ames and Nevada. So it seems to make some sense to put that there. Juvenile court services and the court would still remain front and center to the main lobby. That is option B. Go to option C. We'll just keep going. So option C, this is just moving EOC. EOC is the option for to move in every one of these scenarios. A lot of that has to do, population center, they do collaborate with Iowa State University, as well as the full generator packet. So it made a lot of sense. As well as we've heard, they weren't partial to their location. They actually said or hinted that, lower population centers here, and sometimes that makes it a little difficult to service them. So in this option, we're just moving EOC. What that does, different to the other options, is we had human resources being pulled out and being put on this floor that we're on now. We now are proposing that lower level becomes all county functions. It really would be a private floor. So IT services would be down there, human resources, and auditor storage. So all of that space would be located there. What's next? Again, we're not making hardly any changes on this floor except for remodeling, so I'm just going to go right over it. Option. For this option, the auditor does remain, their office functions, lobby, all that still remains on this floor. Environmental health and P&D moves up to this location. Your conference and overflow space, again, moves down that hallway. Your unisex or gender neutral restroom is located just across the hallway from your conference and overflow space. So human services.
Could we clarify something?
Yeah.
On page 29, are you saying all the auditor space in the lower level is all just auditor storage?
Yes.
Okay, it doesn't say storage on at all.
Yep. Apologies. Yes. it
I
is.
just wanted to make sure that
There-
they went
well,
through it.
I'll clarify that. So the where it says auditor storage and also where the current break room is located could be storage. The long skinny down in the east corner, they have trainings and training rooms in which they lay out tables and go through processes that are a little bit more remote. Right now, they're actually located across the hall in a room that would be, that's better. So that's coming down. So really it's their,
Like
their
where they
pri-
have
Storage and training.
exactly, all their training. And then their all their primary office functions would still remain upstairs.
Thank
When
you.
when you talk about what they do in day in and day out.
That helps me. I was
Yeah.
I was getting confused there.
Yeah. Thanks, Linda. Back to human services. The only difference really, Department of Human Services stays down here. The flex space where facilities management was located becomes flex space. The other floor plans remain the same as the previous option. Because we're moving less people out and just the amount of flexibility with just moving EOC. But a little bit more flex space. So you have flex space now where facilities management was located. So you have flex space next to DHS, which makes a little sense with their working remotely. And then you also have flex space next to county attorney, and as was in the previous option. So that is a lot. Yeah.
I do have a question about juvenile court services and juvenile court. The way we're talking about it, it sounds like they're all kind of lumped together as one thing with no separation.
They
of
are, there would
walls.
be separation, there would be walls and secure back corridors and there would be a chamber. All of that would be included
In that space.
It
There's
is,
enough room for
yeah,
that.
we did the square footage, looked at kind of what our kind of understanding is for the juvenile court services, what that size of that courtroom is, meaning a U-shaped table and more of that inclusive conversation. It's a different size than it is for the courtroom, so that's included in there.
Just making sure they
Yep,
definitely separate.
yep, they're definitely separated. So. Okay, well, I think with that, if there's any more questions, I know we're gonna have a work session and our discussion with everyone at the end, and I'd like to just get through this. We're gonna go through the Justice Center. Maddie and I are gonna do this together. So I'm gonna hand it over to Maddie. She's gonna talk about the jail and sheriff's department, and then I'll talk about the courts. There are two options. So Again, we have no more buildings to go back and forth with, so we'll back and forth this building.
So just some overall observations that we had with the Justice Center. In that back of house area with the courts, there are several restrooms connected to jury rooms and chambers, and none of them are ADA. And according to current code, 50% of them would have to be ADA. So we'd look at reworking those. Currently, the county attorney space is very, very undersized. They don't have enough office space. They don't have any flex space for those workers that are coming from Nevada. They don't even have enough room to have all of their attorneys in one location. They have some in Nevada that should be, or I'm sorry, they have some in Ames that should be in Nevada. And there's a lack of separation between the judicial courts and county attorney, as well as the public space. They have no secure entrance just for them. They also are looking at, in 5 to 10 years, having some growth. So we need to work with that as well. Overall, the separation between judges, attorneys, publics, and detainees is just poorly organized and creates a lot of security issues within the building. We also heard from both the county attorney and the judicial courts that they would like 5 courtrooms, but currently their largest courtroom does not serve their needs for those larger trials. Along with what we discussed previously in those other 3 options, juvenile court is located in Nevada, and a lot of time is wasted traveling back and forth with all of the employees that have to travel to Nevada for juvenile court. Looking at the sheriff and jail spaces, a lot of the sheriff spaces are undersized. They need more armory, uniform storage, more room for employees, as well as a much larger training / briefing room. There are also some inefficiencies in the jail. The way the space is set up, it doesn't meet some of the state and federal codes that are required. Another thing that they mentioned was also the fact that the officers do not have showers or locker rooms. So if there are some sort of hazards that they get on them, they're forced to shower in some of the jail spaces, which are all on camera. So looking at the first option for the sheriff spaces, we would propose adding an addition on to that southwest side that would serve as a larger training room for them, as well as drone storage and uniform storage for those space. Then we would look at remodifying that open or the current briefing room into an open office space for patrol and shift sergeants, and then increasing the armory storage. We also looked at moving one of the offices that's off of the open office space to just south of what would be the open office space in order to increase the lobby size. And then also reworking their break room by moving drone storage out. We would also just look at reconfiguring some of the jail spaces to have it meet those codes, and then also transitioning the restrooms in the jail offices to be showers for the officers.
One thing we also heard, and this is when we talk about size and space, there was a comment when we were meeting with the sheriff department was dispatch not having enough space. So the kind of how far this addition comes out, that is still up for debate as far as, what else may be needed if we move forward into the design process. That was mentioned.
Go over the.
I think do the next one.
So then option B is very similar, but it just looks at infilling the courtyard for that training room and extra storage instead of doing an addition off of the current briefing room.
One thing that additionally is we did look at the restroom counts and modifying the restrooms to be showers within the sheriff department as opposed to in the jail cell. Okay, so for the Justice Center, for both options A and B, for county attorney and the courts, they are the same. So that's why Maddie covered both of those with the sheriff separately. So if you look at option A and B, they're exactly the same. If we go maybe talk first about some of the issues that we're having. County attorney right now doesn't have a secure entry. There's been a couple instances in the public corridor for safety and security. And so right now, as a county attorney or an attorney within that office and who is in trial would be coming in through that main entry into the lobby and in front of the public through the corridor and down the long corridor past the courtrooms to their offices. That creates ample opportunity for incidents to occur. And that was a large concern that we heard from that department in that office. Currently, the courts utilize the back entry that's kind of located here. Right now, there's a little bit of overmingling where the courts is now in some of the county attorney space, and the county attorney doesn't have a room. And so really delineating, it's very important when we look at how courts attorneys are next to one another. And so really delineating that line that this is county attorney space and that this is judicial court space. And so you don't want those individuals to interact with one another in the middle of the trial. So we did draw and delineate that line here. One other thing that we're seeing is right now, detainees are brought from the jail for their hearing down their dubbed the Green Mile, but down this long windowless corridor, there's a central stair and elevator that then pops up and services the courtrooms on the upper floor. I'll just go to that floor plan real quick. So the detainee can come in. We don't have a furniture shown, but you come in kind of in the appropriate location for court. But the issue is, if I'm a judge and I'm in this chamber right here, and I need to go to court upstairs or do anything, I have to then go through the public corridor, from my understanding. There is no pass through this detainee space. Be a conversation about managing how that may happen. If you have a detainee walking that corridor, that there's no court coming through, but you could provide secure access between those two, so you no longer have that issue of traveling around or going into the public space. One thing also to consider right now, if I am also in the chamber here and I need to go upstairs, I have to cross into the county attorney space to utilize the stair, or I have to go into the public lobby and utilize this elevator or this stairwell here. So again, we're crossing public space and creating security issues. One consideration would be to think about a back house elevator, or finding a way to utilize this elevator in a way that could be used. But we do have some architectural issues that would have to be solved to get around that space. But the concern is that right now I can't get to the upper level as if I'm in a chamber at the lower level. What we did propose here was to move the grand courtroom to the lower level, so taking the two smaller courts that were located to the north. The reason for that is, and this was an interesting find, right here on the second floor, we really wanted to locate it here. This is mechanical shades. I don't have a really great image of it. Joby knows there is a lot in there. There's chilled water, there's air handling units. It's really not a corridor. And the cost to the county to move all that stuff and change its location just didn't make any sense. But again, we are landlocked because this is our detainee access. So I can't look through this very well without that detainee popping up right in the middle of the courtroom. So it really forced us to look at this space again. Again, these are just diagrams, this is an ongoing conversation. If we look at county attorney, we did propose and showing in addition to the north, looking at the geothermal well, that's about 250 feet from your existing building. This addition is only about 50 to 60 feet. We did find a proposed parking diagram that I think was something future proposed that was never built. You could definitely look at increasing parking and have county attorney have a separate entry and have courts have a separate entry, and looking at how you could separate those two and not bringing them through this public body. I think that's pretty much it that we have for reports right now. Maddie did mention the ADA restrooms. We do have right now, there's a restroom that's in the jury room. If they're sequestered, that has to be ADA. Unless you're going to have somebody escort them to the restroom in the corridor, or potentially cross paths with a lawyer or with someone else. So that really needs to be ADA. So we looked at, how we could accommodate that. It's going to be tight, and so really, all those would have to be kind of moved to ADA, but then also 50% of the others. So, that would be something that we want to look at, as well as we're just selling a big orange box. County attorney also needs its own back of house restroom. Those would be located in that space as well. There's currently they're using the small courtroom right now, the conference room that will be relocated in addition. So that is works.
And break rooms. I know we talked about a break room on every floor in this building.
Not in this. This would still be in departments. So,
Okay, but the justice building.
So there
yes,
would
in
be
the justice building.
a break room.
Yeah, because I think the interesting part about this building is you have a jail, the sheriff's department, you have a county attorney with courts.
Right.
Really, how they interact and intermingle with each other doesn't work to have a floor break room.
Right.
So every department would still maintain their break room. And when we're remodeling or looking at those additions, we would accommodate those spaces. So I think lastly, we heard a lot about storage. There really are three different spaces. Not a part of our study, but I think it's worthy of noting is the range, and sheriff's storage is part of our study, but not the range itself, but they really work together. IRBM also has storage, facilities management, and EOC. So the range and sheriff storage, so I think we talk about the range first. It's a gun shooting range. It's also on property north of here, on a gravel road that there is, I believe, some egress or easement with the neighbor that comes through the property. So we do have some accessibility issues. We have issues with adding facilities and getting water service and all those other things out there. We're kind of pinned in. So it's shared with IRBM. We also have a shooting range. And right now, they're using an old slaughterhouse as their training facility, the size of maybe a double car garage. They do train and have increased their training for officers over the years, as well as are going to increase their staff. So they really do need a space and training facility adjacent to the range. And as well as they don't have enough parking spaces out there, they're parking on the gravel road. Also, that gravel road is going out there in inclement weather, it's not the best. And then that's the range facility. Sheriff storage. I'm not going to go through the list. There's a lot, but we'll look at just a diagram of how many square footage that's separate. So that would include all their emergency vehicles, anything that needs to be in climate controlled storage versus not. So secondly, IRBM shares storage with facilities management at the 4-H building. We've talked about this. It is unavailable during the county fair, so that forces Joby and the IRBM guys to, mobilize their staff to move all these vehicles, have them out in the weather, and then I think this year was actually longer than last year, does become very inconvenient. And the agreement, from my understanding, is not permanent. So if they could pull it at any time, and then the county is out that storage facility and moves left for something else. So IRBM needs dry storage facility between 4 and 6,000 square feet. We did just talk about facilities management in that space, 6,000 square feet. Now, emergency operations and EOC. There is a shed facility that also not part of the study, but we did look at in Northwest Ames on Reliable Street. It's, from my understanding, when it rains, it pours. They redid the road and water pretty much runs right through the building. It's an old barn, essentially. It's not climate controlled, so their equipment can deteriorate over time. And then they do need storage for bottled water, clothes, emergency supplies. So you think of, I think with COVID, it was probably masks and all that other fun stuff and hand sanitizer, but you don't want that to be in a building that's 100 degrees. So, we did do a diagram, and I'm sorry, this is small, but really what the space requirements are. So facilities management around 6,000 square feet. I think we've got 54 on here when we started to get closer into those numbers. IRBM was 3,000 to 4,000. Sheriff, and this also includes our climate controlled and dry storage areas, would be 6,000 square feet, and EOC at 2,400. So right now you're looking around 1,700 square feet of storage. That's a lot of space. And the question really to the county is how to deal with this. Some of our proposals, we've got to understand that the range is taxed. I'm not going to be able to really give the sheriffs a great facility with the size of storage that they need and their training facility out there, as well as accessibility, water, all those other things. I know that there have been conversations about debris pickup. You think of the derecho and how you process that as a county. Our suggestion would be is to look for a property. Would be to look for something that is easily accessible, probably on a paved road. You know, ideally somewhere either closer to Ames, maybe a little bit, or but accessible from both locations. It could be a combination of having IRBM take over the range, relocating the range and moving some of those pieces and parts around. But we're giving you kind of the understanding of what size and space you need. I think there's be further conversations of how that mix would. Right now, I don't understand that we have any facility or location that we can consider. I know there's been with the sheriffs, and I don't know if Lenny's here today, but understanding if Quest building was available. There's been conversations of buildings for the sheriff, just furthering that. So with that, I think we're going to move into discussions and work session.
I want to start with questions from the Board of Supervisors, and then I think that's the way Jovi suggested to open it up for discussions in the group.
Sure. First, I want to thank you for your presentation and some of the detail that you provided. And I'd like to think all the different options laid out so I can kind of match them up and see the differences. So I do thank you for that.
I got a list.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. Conservation. And I may be asking questions and you don't have the answers yet, but I don't see any square footage on some of these. Are there differences on option A and option B on the amount of square footage?
They are the same.
They're the same. What is it?
We've intentionally left square footage off because we want to really address the broad brushstrokes and make sure we're making the right decision before we move forward. So that would be provided in the final report, or as our next draft review at 95% to understand the square footage, but they are the same. I don't have those numbers.
Do you think that, I'm assuming that option A would be a higher percentage of, I'm just trying to get a sense of, what we. Maybe that's for the next time. I would be concerned in terms of, I want to use the maximum reuse. Yes, that's what I was thinking about with that. Not thinking about the square footage. Going on to the admin building. I just wondered about the use, if you have looked at all into the use of the shared spaces. We've got a lot of conference rooms that are shared space. I don't know, most of them, I think, get used by reserving them. And I wondered if there might be some data about when they're being used. I hate to see shared space that, we just put everything there, but a lot of it sits vacant like 70% or 80% of the time. And I realize that maybe there's a need that everybody needs, in October, everybody needs room or something like that. But if there's any data that could let us know if we're not using that shared space more efficiently, or could we use it more? Do we need as much as we have, or could we use it better? And I also, on the lower level, you have the hoteling space. To me, that just, I didn't know if you had any idea how many folks you thought would be using that, but that looked pretty large to me. And I wondered if there's options of merging the hoteling space with some other shared meeting room space or something. I just see, if you walk around any public building, I think you see so much space that just sits there 70 to 80% of the time not used. And I know there's a kind of a mix to it, a good balance to be there. And I'm wondering if we have more data you can look at to determine if it's still,
Right size. Yeah.
And I saw this, when we go over to the Human Services Center, I had a talk with Keith Morgan earlier, our emergency manager and administrator, about the EOC doesn't get used very much. When it needs to be used, it needs to be used, but I've seen all the EF stations they've got there, and even like during the derecho or during the pandemic, they weren't all used. Maybe just there were a couple people there, but you've got it all set up. I asked Keith if he thought the EOC could serve as hoteling space as well.
And I believe that it could. And I think that it's right now, as it's set up in the building here, you really landlocked by how the power is supplied to those areas. If it was something where you added floor boxes where you could be a little bit more flexible or move some of that around, then definitely. Again, if you have an emergency, I don't think not everybody's going to want to use the hotel space depending on what the emergency is, but definitely you could break it up. He did mention when we spoke to him about pods, about having 2 or 3 different pods as opposed to one large room.
Yeah.
And how we set up monitors. I think that would be something as we go further into the design process, really understanding what that would be.
Thank you. Staying with PHS, did they agree to the square footage reduction? Have you talked to them about that? Did they think? I've toured there, and you're right. Most of those cubicles, they're going to share those cubicles, just have like extra chairs in there. Did they think they could do with half the space if they had the flex space?
Yes, and we also did receive numbers from DHS to understand how many of their staff, they were kind of in the interim, very early stages when we first met with them, of implementing work from home and really didn't have their numbers. Joby's provided updates and we've asked questions throughout this process. I still think that it's a little bit of a moving target as this is a newer program and understanding that, as well as we know DHS and funding and all of that. How we can be a little bit more flexible. Is that flex space within that building? Could that accommodate if more funding is available? Those types of things, we want to at least allow for some of that as well. So they can shrink, grow as those things change over the years.
And Supervisor Markin, it looks like there is somebody from DHS on the Zoom too today.
Okay.
Thank you.
Going on to the flex space for DHS, I wondered if it could be hoteling space in general. And the reason is I see some, we're talking about people wanting to come to Nevada to work. Sometimes people may need particularly moving other things over to Human Services Center. There may be more of a need for hoteling space there as well. I often will use that second floor conference room when I need space in Ames. But that's not always available, and with moving more things in there, it might be even less available. So I think the more you can have shared hoteling space there, as confidentiality allows, I think it would be used there, maybe even more than in this building.
Maybe one note too on when we refer to flexible space and hoteling space, there would be a mix of spaces that would happen within that. So we would have maybe some open office environments, but there would also probably be small rooms for people to take phone calls and have private conversations. It would be a mix of space types that would allow people to, you know, maybe work half a day there and be able to do what they need to in a flexible way or collaborate with a few others while they're there.
If you don't mind, I have a few more minutes, I can get through. Sure. Okay. Option B was moving facilities management rather than IT to HSC. The reason for moving IT was the generator. I can certainly see from what we went through in the pandemic that our greatest need, because we moved a lot of people to working from home for a few months, and we can do that in an emergency. I just wonder which has the greater need for the generator, IT or facilities management. I would think it would be IT, but I'll defer to Joby on that also.
I believe it would be IT. And I think, at least from our perspective, Joby, yeah, chime in, but you guys move around a lot already. You were all over. So it's just a matter, and you do already have touchdown spaces in all buildings. So,
Yeah, pretty much. Our major buildings, we have space, shelves in each building. As far as utilizing the generator, I mean, obviously IT is going to be a higher priority than facilities management. I mean, there's other reasons that us staying here is probably better than us being in Ames. That's a lot of all the different offices. It may seem small, but it could be a major inconvenience is new hires. Once they go to HR, the second place they go is facilities management with their credentials. So somebody's got to go from this building to Ames just to get, it seems simple, but I mean, the working relationship with the other offices and departments is probably us being in the beta is more, it's probably better than being.
Majority of your county offices and functions are still located in.
Because I work with a lot of the sheriff's office,
Yeah.
all the other elected offices, a lot.
It's a big number.
I go on to option C for the admin building. I wasn't crazy about moving HR to lower level at all. The HR director is also our director of internal operations, and I think it's important to keep both the director of internal operations. Sorry, Liz, I know you're trying to, but to keep both Liz as close to the supervisor's office. I saw HR on a different level as not being very functional. For that reason. I'm on to the Justice Center now. There's a lot of new options on admin. I'd be interested in hearing how people are reacting to those various options. There's more than I thought about. Justice Center. For the sheriff's office, what I heard mostly was increasing necessities for staff, for training, for restrooms that are separate from the jail, shower facilities, those kind of things. I didn't hear increasing jail capacity necessarily. This isn't a proposal to increase jail capacity. Okay. Wanted to make sure.
The issue with the jail, and when we talk about proposed remodels of the jail, is that housing female and male detainees and sightlines and views, and that is really what is the jail remodel. There's also some temporary holding that happens, specifically when campus is back in and the students are back in session, and really just remodeling some of those interior spaces to better fit the needs that they have. So it's not a wholesale start from scratch.
I had trouble looking at these design, these buildings, I'm trying to figure out what was new and what was existing, as far as I'm most familiar with this building. How much new, how many, by what percentage you're increasing the square footage for the sheriff's department, sheriff's office, and for county
Yep.
attorneys? I couldn't quite tell.
Yep. I don't have the percentage or square footage currently, but I've got it. And can share that. It's back to the broad brush strokes and just making sure we get it
Sure.
right.
And
You
you
know,
talk-
one option versus the other.
And option A and B on this building, they are not equal in size because obviously option B is landlocked in the courtyard area.
that's the courtyard, which
Yeah.
is a good thing, because that's going on in the street. And unless I'm missing something. Oh, that's an interesting idea.
You floors for.
In this, in
Yeah.
Oh,
You're
that
filling it in,
area.
filling both floors, not just the
You
first
could,
floor.
I think what you're, because the building is really bisected, you're then dealing with access, or you add in an elevator. Because I've got a mechanical penthouse in the way, and the jail is the only thing over there that's double height on that side of the building.
and the courtyard space is more cut off from the rest of that
It is very,
than, yeah.
and
So there's
that's,
some pros and cons.
yep, and that's also why it's not a county attorney isn't showing up in that space, because you'd have to cross the courts. But, you know, to get to those office spaces.
Let's move on to the court space. You haven't talked about the space the court is using or the clerk of court.
Mhm.
Do you have any sense what percentage of that space is being utilized? If there's extra space there, or did you just stay away from that because it was hard to deal with utilizing that space for anybody else's purpose?
From what we heard, it functions well. They actually have a large space and they have a double height space. You could look at potentially, you know, filling that in and giving that space back to the second floor. But then the question is, well, what is it utilized for at that level? Because it is across the hallway. It's, you know, is it more conference room space adjacent to the courtrooms? Or more better utilized space? So we didn't, you know, really address a lot of their area.
Are you going to look at it more closely?
Yes.
And clerk of court space as well?
Yes, but from what we heard meeting with that group, they didn't have any real needs. I think it is looking at the efficiency of their space. If you could shrink their space or be more efficient within that, because of where they're located, I don't know what you would then put in that location. And that would be some more thought, you know, for us to do what you would put there.
Well, I know that there's not a, I understand that because I've gone through that area and I understand exactly what you're saying. On the other hand, we're talking about building a lot of square footage.
Yep.
And I've got to think that new construction costs more for the taxpayers than remodeling does. So I'm not about to give up on saying we can't do something there.
Yep.
So the last thing I wanted to mention was, you were talking about looking for property. You're talking about a combination of property with combined storage space, full barn or something like that, at least for a majority of stuff, maybe some climate control, some other stuff, plus a debris site. It's really important to think about what the debris site would be used for. With the derecho, we rented some land at Stover. Well, but all they wanted us to use it for was brush. We talked about the fact that the county needs a debris site if some other thing happens, such as a tornado, because you've got white goods, then you've got a whole bunch of stuff that might not be real pretty, might not, I mean, we have some environmental issues to it. Is there any reason not to have a debris site in association with anything we're looking at for storage that we could use for all kinds of debris? I think we really need to do that.
I think it's gonna come down to how you look at security on the property, because with having some sheriff's storage located there, we'll just have to make sure that if there's secure fencing or things like that to try to separate vehicular traffic most likely, and just make sure that that all works. But I don't know that it doesn't, I don't know that it would eliminate them being on the same site.
But Linda, you do bring up something when we talk about water management and debris. You think of a tornado, and you've got refrigerators, compressors. You know, you've got a bunch of hazardous material, and how that would work and have to be separated and also be considered from a watershed management, all those other things would have to be considered as part of that property. And it's not to say that that debris site has to be with the storage, they could definitely be separate properties, but then you are, potentially looking at two.
But I'm just wondering if it's possible, because, yeah, and that is our problem, is trying to rent property temporarily to put things like that on. No
Nobody
farmer
wants
to
it.
do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no farmer wants to do that.
Yeah.
So it really comes down to, it probably needs to be publicly owned land for us to fulfill that responsibility in an emergency.
Well, I think that the question too, and this is getting above some of my experience with this, and maybe some of my colleagues can answer this, but understanding if there's temporary permitting that happens in an emergency to accommodate some of those. I'm just curious what,
Temporary what?
like, is there any sort of temporary permitting or anything to accommodate those types of debris?
I don't know enough.
Yeah, so we would have to do some digging to understand what can go where and how, so,
Planning development might be helpful.
yes.
There is temporary waivers available in event of a disaster, and we could talk some more about that.
Thank you.
Perfect, thank you.
I don't have a lot of questions, but I did have one though in regards to the Justice Building. Just again, can you just kind of reiterate, it sounds like there's more challenges with the court system with having that more secure area. And I'm assuming that this isn't the final, that's not something that's totally fleshed out. It's just kind of identified that that's the issue that we would need to need to figure out how to make that a more secure or private, whether it's a private entrance or going from one courtroom to, another area of the building.
Yeah.
Am I clear on
You're
that?
correct. I've worked on a fair amount of court projects, and what we find is it's all about solving those circulation paths. And it's all about keeping the individuals separate from one another, and how we do that, because you have the public detainees, you have the, judicial side, and then you have the attorneys, and how to, be sensitive to all of those layers. We've done, and this building does a good job of keeping the detainees out of the public corridor, which is great, because you affect their presumed innocence by bringing them in, walking them down in handcuffs and things like that to the court case. But there are other issues here that we were discussed with about, how do you get county attorney into the building away from, the person that they are going to be standing in front of.
I just want to make sure I understood your question. So the scenarios that we offered, I think with an addition, we can solve the access as far as getting secured access for employees. Are you asking about greater clarity on how we're solving or proposing to solve the circulation in that sort of central
Yes.
core area?
Yeah.
Can you describe that a little bit more for her? I mean, because I know we proposed adding an elevator, and maybe just talk them through what we're thinking there.
So what I'm showing this arrow crossing the detainee corridor, and
Which
there,
one?
if you're looking on page 38.
Okay.
It should be the same on both.
Yeah, 38 or
Okay.
36 will do the trick.
Okay.
There's an arrow going north-south.
Yep.
Right now, there's no way to cross that detainee space. So it comes down to management, in which the sheriff, when they unlock that door from the jail to bring a detainee
On the other end.
on the other end of the hallway, so to your left, if you go past, that long corridor. So when
Oh,
you get
yeah, through here. Okay, yes, okay.
So that door is controlled already, but understanding that the courts know somebody's in there and they can't cross this threshold. Right now, there's no way to cross that except going out the corridor and into the public lobby and back around.
Okay.
So we'd be proposing basically opening up an access path, and then you have to use technology to help solve
Yes.
how you let
Gotcha,
people into
okay.
and out of that space at appropriate times.
Yep, to control those people
To control those,
crossing
yeah.
paths.
Gotcha, okay, okay.
The other issue is the elevator. And right now, And I'll just say this, typically judges and judicial, they tend to be older. They like to stay in their position for a long time. And so really understanding that if they need to use the elevator to get up to court on the second floor, they are then going again into the public lobby. There's no back of house vertical circulation except a stair. And sometimes if you're trying to, we haven't gone into how you guys have your court system and scheduling all understood, if you're really going and running from one to the other or not. But that would be something to look at as well.
And I have one other question, and it was in the HCS building. I believe you had DHS and community services looked like they were on the same floor, if I'm correct, or was it veterans, but I'm just trying to find the page.
They're on the same floor.
Yeah, so were you looking at them having two entry doors on that main level? I'm just trying to figure out how.
Not sharing a lobby.
Are they not sharing a lobby? Are they sharing a lobby?
Which page are you on? Oh, I can't scroll down the mouse anymore.
I think they're. They used to be elected.
Well, that's what I thought too.
You said option A.
Open up the space a little bit and have two doors.
Page 19.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would say,
Yeah.
I think that's going to be a conversation between the two of them. Obviously, you could utilize space better if you had one lobby for both and then you went into separate doors. But they could be separate lobbies as well. I think that there's obviously with all of these, there's issues of confidentiality and really accommodating DHS is one where also community services as well, where it's not just one person coming in, it may be a whole family. And so just making sure that we have accommodating spaces for them. They're sharing personal information and that other individuals in the lobby aren't hearing them. So it may make some sense to, if you combine those lobbies, but provide enough space because we've made it bigger, that might be something to look at. But it's also down to wayfinding and making sure they go to the right door and all that.
Right.
So,
Right.
Yeah.
So, all right, thank you. That's my question. So I guess I'd like to open it up if other folks have some questions on what was presented today. So here on Zoom, using the raise hand function, Leanne, I see that there's a comment in the chat. Yep, so it looks like Jana wanted to ask a question.
Yes, thank you. In respect to the Department of Human Services space, as it is outlined, and I've been hearing the questions and discussions, my questions and concerns are, yes, lobby space. There's very little room in the current area for clients when they come in to fill out and submit paperwork. So having a space or opportunity for folks to be able to sit and use space to fill out documents that they can then leave instead of having to come back and return. Additionally, the concern about entry when we have children, the department may need to take custody of children in circumstances and situations. They may come in with their parents. They may come in to do a visit, and having children be able to be in spaces that are appropriate for them in a way. It's difficult for me to tell how the juvenile justice entry and the Department of Human Services entries kind of coexist in that model. So just wanting to make sure we have consideration for the clients that we will be encountering. Additionally, for staff space, we do have a need for, yes, the hoteling, as you're calling it, where people can dock and have opportunity just to come in and if they're in between visits or just needing to do paperwork or computer work. But we do, as we continue to have certain jurisdictions still using virtual court. So being able to have space where you can attend and log on to a virtual court hearing where we would need some confidentiality. And additionally, when we have persons who are on probation, they are not allowed to work from home until they have successfully completed their probation, so that they can be monitored by a supervisor in the office, and that we can ensure that we have adequate work for them to do when they don't have full caseloads. So that would be at least 6 months of a permanent space for individuals to be able to be in the office setting. And then our income maintenance workers, either we would need to have the Wi-Fi be more functional and consistent, or we would still need to have landlines for phones for income maintenance staff that would need to also be in the building.
Jenna, thank you for your comments. I had one question about how, can you describe to me how children are moved from juvenile services to your department currently, and what maybe the ideal solution? And then secondly would be, when we talk about conference space for virtual work, I'm envisioning a conference room with video conferencing technology. Kind of how many people would you need in that room?
Okay, so I might not have been clear on, there are times when we have concurrent jurisdiction between a child that has an open case with the department and that would maybe also have an open case with juvenile court. My comment was with respect to understanding the layout as it was presented. And when we have little children that we've had to remove from families, or that may be coming in to have visits, I wasn't sure how that space entry with juvenile court and DHS in the entry portion, just making sure that children aren't afraid, or that there's not, I can't visualize it. I'm not sure. I think someone else said it's hard for me to picture in my mind how the entry ports work, and just wanting to be cognizant of that. By example, we have very child-friendly entrances in a lot of our buildings, because we know that children are going through trauma, they're experiencing very strange and unusual circumstances. And so we try to provide entry into our services that is more comforting, perhaps. And so just wondering what that looked like was mostly my question. And then as far as the conferencing space, you know, a conference room is adequate. A small, you know, potentially even like an office area that would have a door that could house 2 or 3 people at a time to be on a monitor is adequate enough.
Okay. Is she maybe confused in community services?
Yes, I'm so sorry. I'm not, it's hard to see on the monitor, so I apologize.
Yeah, when she's talking about the shared entrance between, or moving people between in that entrance space, she's saying juvenile court, but I think what we were looking at was community services.
Yes, sorry.
No, I just wanted to make sure I was following correctly.
And I know it is a broad brush strokes. We're really just looking at space and square footage and locations. So as we dive further into it, how that looks, how it feels.
Okay.
Understanding how even just, you know, how some of those work together is just good to hear. And that would be something we would address as we move forward.
Post study.
Yeah, post study.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Barb? Okay, yeah, looks like Barb Steinbeck.
Good morning. I just had some comments about the suggestion for moving IT to Ames, and it seems to be centered around the generator capabilities. So we do have processes in place to accommodate the generator limitations at the admin building. The server room is definitely covered. And we all have extension cords under our desk that we can plug into the hot outlets that are supported by the generator. We have flashlights and battery operated laptops in case of an outage. And we also have space at the server room at the Justice Center to relocate if we need. So the server room at HSC is tiny and it's used for backups only. So moving us away from our 2 main server rooms at the Justice Center and admin just doesn't make sense. Moving the systems to Ames would require significant downtime and cost, as we'd have to get outside vendors involved. And as it stands now, there would not be room for the systems in the Ames server room. And also, we do daily backups with tape rotations at the admin building, and this requires a physical access. So we do need to frequently access the phone room also, where the T1s and the fiber are located, in order to troubleshoot network issues. Our cold storage is located just off the IT workroom, and it's essential for us to keep our extra equipment and supplies in. We support the cameras. We've brought that in-house at the Justice Center, and we frequently need to be there physically to install and troubleshoot. Also, the public safety equipment for the public safety network is located in Nevada. So CJIS, which is the State Criminal Justice Information Services, requires that we have secure access to these systems. Moving IT would make us non-compliant. And also, we've looked at our ticketing system. 90% of our support tickets are for users located in the Nevada area. So moving us to Ames would require a lot more driving back and forth and using a lot of time to do so, making us less efficient as a team. Now, there's a lot we can do remotely, but there are times when physical touch is needed and appreciated. So the only two requests I had for IT were to expand the server room at HSC, so we were able to work in there without bumping the cables and switches, thus taking down our backups. And then I just wanted to reorganize the lobby area at the admin building. I feel there's some wasted space there. So really, those are my only two requests, and it doesn't make sense to move us to an area where it would take significant cost to make it functional as we have it here at the admin building. And that's all I had.
Barb, I just have a clarification question for you. When you said reorganize the lobby area, were you referring to the lobby area as you first enter our building, or were you referring to the lobby area in your department?
In my department, where Tim sits, and then there's access to the phone room there as well. It just feels like it could be better reorganized.
Thank you.
Barb, I really appreciate your comments and understanding more of how you function, as well as some of those code requirements. As you know, we're looking at who can move and what makes sense. And it sounds like there's a significant amount of obstacles. I do know that the two requests that you had were included in there, but I do appreciate your comments, and we'll take a further look into that.
Okay, thank you.
And Ted?
Yeah, so I had a couple of notes that I wrote down while we were going through. The first one has to do with what Barb just said. When we have customers in our office and stuff is going down and we need IT support, we need it right away. So if IT were to move, like their main office, we would still want at least 1 or 2 technicians in this building, because customers and members of the public aren't always patient, and a 10 or 15 minute drive from Ames won't go over well with somebody waiting at our counter. The next concern I have is the shared break room and losing our break room within our department. I know that with COVID especially, we've all kind of isolated ourselves, and having those separate break rooms helps us isolate ourselves. Sometimes for, countywide unity and collaboration, it's great to have break rooms where we all interact a little more, but I know that helps. And then my big concern, even bigger than keeping people separate, if, hopefully seems that giant pandemics happen about every 100 years. So hopefully we won't have to deal with this again for a while. But I know my group is, we're constantly having a flow of traffic in here. When we get a break, we want a little break from the public, and having those break rooms with an open door kind of right into public spaces, I know would be a little bit uncomfortable. We have people that actually stop our clerks sometimes as they're walking back and forth from the bathroom to ask some questions or to say things. So I know that they would all be a little sad to lose our our more private break room and where we can do things as kind of a department, food days or whatever on the last day of a busy month. So, while I would like the extra space, I'm a little worried about losing our break room. The last two are just comments. I think if we had more general space available, more meeting room space, and it was easier to use or easier to reserve, like if we could just reserve rooms right off of Outlook or some other thing. I know our department would use them more often. We have a lot of meetings in my office, which are kind of tight and cramped, but we don't ever worry about having to reserve my office. So I know that if we had more space, we would use it on a regular basis. I know Linda said that space often doesn't get used a lot of the time. And I think it's just right now, it's difficult to, reserve those rooms and it's awkward. So we just don't do it. And then this is just a comment as a member of the county who lives on the east side of the county. The space needs of the EOC, I have no idea where they would be best suited, but as somebody who needs to serve the county with emergencies everywhere, I think you might get pushback from some of the smaller communities that aren't right in close to Ames. If we moved the EOC to Ames, maybe not, but I think having them centrally located and located close to the sheriff's office is important just in terms of addressing situations that arise all over the county. So that last one was just kind of commentary, but the first two are my big concerns. Thanks.
Thanks, Ted. There are other folks that have questions. Sure.
First of all, I need to apologize to this group when they met the sheriff's office. I had other obligations and I wasn't able to join them at that time. Looking through some of the options and listening, I want to make sure I clearly heard. I didn't see where they had storage, vehicle impound for outside and inside, and equipment storage in that as well. So we have.
I was given a list of all storage from Lenny, and I think that it's, I don't know if anymore. It's included in that 6,000 square foot space that we were showing us the diagram.
Okay, now is the storage that you.
That would not include anything.
That would not be there. But the storage that we're talking about for vehicles, that would be, we also have the need for vehicle impound from time to time. This is what we want inside and outside. The outside would just be a chain link fence that we could secure. In the inside, we have, I'm sure we'll explain to you, dive equipment.
Yep.
Trailers. We have ERT vehicles.
We got that.
Okay, very good.
So the outside impound in that, do you know what size or how many vehicles you want to store just on the flat one?
Well, we had something that be big enough. You will definitely get something.
Well, as far as the outdoor area, I think that just having enough gated, secured space that could store a couple of vehicles and then extra room just in case there's other, because it's going to be cyclical, hit and miss. We might have a vehicle that needs to be stored. We might have trailers. We might have, just large, farm. You just never know.
So where are you storing that now?
Well, we rent spaces.
Okay.
And so we have something, we have one night that we have rent spaces on the Lincoln land outside storage area. And again, I think I know I'm the only elected official that was here when the Justice Center was conceived, went through referendums, and I was in on that. No problem with that. When we brought out to the Justice Center, that was going to take care of our storage. By the time the Justice Center was built, we already outworked it. And this is why we had to continue renting spaces outside. I would like to see that not happen again. So when we these things, I would like to bring everything. We have, as an example, of records in a basement of a hotel we're renting space at. It has been flooded a couple times. So you can imagine these records that we have to keep. concern I have. So the outside storage, I would say if we look at maybe a dozen vehicles, space there, because that would also handle what Lieutenant Ellis was talking about, with the trailers that come in, things like this. We need to have some space to operate. Inside, we'd also like an area for when we have a vehicle that we have to search or we have to do quality reconstruction, we have to look at things. We have to go to one of the record companies and just use their space. It's not secured, it's not confined. And so for us to be able to do a good work through on that vehicle, we'd like to have something that is, that would be within that storage area to do that, where we have the other vehicles there. And we continue to grow in our office. We're already looking at a couple of different vehicles. Might be a surprise to the supervisor, but that we're growing into the need for. And again, as soon as we get this thing completed, I don't want to be having to look for additional places to rent. So future expenses. Another thing I can speak about the gun range. If we could move to there, he said not enough areas for training needs. What I had envisioned was a building large enough that would be able to do appropriate classroom training. We would have restrooms, male and female restrooms. We would have an area so we could do cleaning and armoring of weapons. We would like to have places even store ammunition and also a towel. And that was all covered.
It was, yep, it was covered. We went out there and we got the sketch as well. Space. So on the side of that whole building or facility. Sheriff, before you go on, I just have a question. You did mention rented spaces, and I know that that's something that we had heard about, but wasn't brought up when we met with your office. And I'm just curious, do you have a comprehensive list of what you have where, so we can understand what you currently have, to maybe understand some of your future needs?
So I'm gonna get my staff after this.
That would be really great, because we did not have that available. Especially, you know, you talk about record storage is getting wet, we want to take care of that, so.
We would take care of that, but when we moved out to the Justice Center, we were much smaller, less involved agency than what we've become with the years. And the storage we have is just, it's tiny. And
Well, even what we saw, I mean, I haven't seen any of your additional space, but we saw there, you were very flat in Justice Center. So.
very good. Well, I'm glad you got a chance to see that, and my staff did a good job. Very proud. We will do a good job. Sheriff's office. With the assistance of his staff, we can get through those. I just want to make sure these areas are taken into consideration. And again, it's very important to me that we not only design for today's needs, but we're looking at what our needs are now. We've been in the Justice Center. So it's going to be a while. This isn't something we're going to be able to do. When we do, we get it right and move forward.
Here. We were tasked, and Jody and the team brought us on, is looking at 5 to 10 years out. But I think, you know, consideration of maybe understanding, because we definitely don't want to, you know, build something and operate by the time that.
5 to 10 years out, maybe.
I know you'd be retired, right? I hear it. That outdoor area, does it need to be paved or is gravel okay?
Right now, with what we have, we can do it. But it would help to come within budget to do gravel instead of paving. I think that's something we can live with inside the facility. Paving. When we had the Justice Center, I still got the they did at Justice Center. Then they also have future expansion and blocks that show how they were doing change. But anyway, as we I guess look at the things that when the Justice Center was built, it was for 12 million and it couldn't go over 12.9. So in order to do that, we cut things and we cut the deputies' workout facilities and shower area. We cut back on some sites, the offices, and we cut back on a number of these same, so here today, we're back, the rest of the day, and needs at the end. So anyway, from what I hear from you guys, you are future visitor looking at this, so very good. We'll get that information put together to you.
Before we get too far away from the range facility, is in the presentation, we picked up on proposing relocating. Is that correct?
And it's all kind of up in the air to understand what you guys have as concerns. And I also, I know that
Those be probably some sheriff could answer better, but maybe it's a better idea to think about moving IPM to gain the sheriff needs for his facility versus relocating the shooting range, because I'm sure that relocating a shooting range is probably not really.
you've got to sift that soil and clean all that and mitigate it.
And then you heard their needs in the meeting for their, range facility. We have a rough idea on square footage in mind. That facility really isn't underneath this umbrella of the study, but
The shooting area itself is about 5.4 acres. I have my notes somewhere on here.
it doesn't speak more to the
Yep, the shooting area.
building.
The building, the building was a 60 by 80 pole building, which was proposed. But then it's also parking for 20 to 25 vehicles, so that area as well. So we do have an understanding of what that needs to be. Just looking at the current plan for at least shooting areas, because you have your speed and everything. So, it's very different.
Shooting range is something we're very proud of.
Yeah, it was interesting to go out there.
We were able to build that with no taxpayer dollars. And the only thing cost us was fence and we drug forfeiture budget. So we did that with no tax dollars. Yeah, it was quite a story here, but same time difficult. Find a facility or a location and we can put a facility like we have today.
Other questions or comments? Carla?
I have just two things. When you were looking at the jail space, you guys talk about space for programming or outside services. And adding additional space.
That wasn't a big part of the discussion,
No.
mainly due to the timing of COVID, that was in our priority. Main discussion had to do with female inmate housing, sex sound separation for the female inmates. For options in our booking area. In addition to the showers.
So, if you back up, what are you envisioning, or what does that look like when you talk about bringing outside people in?
A lot of our stuff right now for mental health services that are confidential services are in telehealth. Prior to COVID, we did have practitioners services often in the jail. In the space that's primarily utilized for that, we have a staff that works over there, and there's a larger like conferencing space off of that space. So a lot of activities I think take place in there. There's just a lot of logistical things that have to be worked out, certainly, but if there's any groups or activities in there, then that limits our staff number for being able to go do some other things or meet with
You mean how that staff member process through that jail space when you have inmates in the kitchen next door and all that?
I don't know that the kitchen bothers us so much, but just having a space where we can meet safely and confidentially with individuals in that, or if we were to do any type of group activity or something, having that programming space available.
You're saying the space that you've utilized before is multi-purpose space.
Yeah.
So having a designated area for those confidential interactions, right?
And just offer the ability to offer more.
I think people would be
I don't know, I guess how many, I don't know, Mike, if you have an idea of how many people participated.
Or is the understanding is a group of 10 people, is a group of one-on-one conversations and sit down or?
It varied. There was both. Just looking back at the schedule for that room prior to COVID, I could say there were 2 groups every day of the week that were meeting in there in the morning and in the afternoon. In addition to the one-on-one that her staff member would be meeting with individuals. So there could be a need for a separate space for the one-on-one meetings for staff members.
Gotcha.
While those other events are going on.
Yeah, 'cause you can't do both.
Like your other side, Spencer?
The room would accommodate more than 10. I don't
I guess we could look at the
foresee it
size
being
of the
more than 15, so just based on classification. needs of the jail.
What I'm hearing is you need a separate office. Your group room is fine. You need a separate office to be used while group room is being used. Is that right, Carla? What I'm hearing through this, I'm trying to translate this, is that you have a room there that's good for the groups. It's just that you can't use it for anything else then, and you need a separate office for your staff to have one-on-one meetings. So you're just asking for one more office.
Yeah, if that could be possible, I think that would help.
Around country jail populations. Studies. See 40 to 60% will have either a mental health and or addictions issue. So these are things that the program that we bring in to try to address. It's, states.
My second question was just, could you talk about the break room space at HSC? Are you envisioning like break room on each floor there, or would it be one central break room for building or individual?
I don't think we've done quite into that one yet. So right now, as we are graphically indicating it, we still within the department. So we do have that one break room that's existing kind of off the main lobby. There's a question internally of how we would want to handle that, as it's kind of, that would be right next to the main courtroom. It doesn't quite make sense to be there. So that would be something we'll continue looking into.
Melissa?
In looking at the options, we have no objection of moving to the HSC building. We would ask that we have to strike a balance between keeping our access to the public. You have people that do come to our office looking for information, but also keeping our EOC secure. So the basement option, the lower level option would be something that could be more easily secured. And then we can talk about design, about still allowing public to access the staff in our office. Something that potentially puts us a little closer to the east side of the building with the loading dock would be beneficial, because there are occasions where we may need to offload things such as personal protective equipment, things like that. So we need to strike that balance. So that basement space would copy that lower level space. Yeah.
Would it be useful to have your vehicle space at wherever you are, say if you were in HSC at some part of that parking lot as opposed to the place on Reliable Street?
That's not so much in the location of the storage is not so much an issue.
Okay.
I mean, if we would move to Ames, having that space in Ames to be able to quickly go through, that would be beneficial. It's not something that I think would be necessary to be relocated onto that space there. But having it so where we can simply get it picked up quickly. Our biggest issue with storage is just making sure it is large enough for one person to be able to go and move equipment. Currently, the storage we have, we're grateful because we can get it out of the weather, but it takes 2 staff members, and there have been occasions where Jody has allowed us to use some of his staff to be able to get equipment moved in situations. Either needs to be a drive-through type situation. It does not have to be right next to the HSC building.
You wouldn't mind, let's say there was some storage space somewhere around the Veda where we had facilities management and IRBM stuff, would it be possible
Yeah.
to store your trailers
Yeah.
with those?
And that actually, putting it in Nevada does kind of almost put smack in the middle of the county, so if we were having to go out to any of the four corners of the county with some of our resources.
And,
it's
you
fun.
know, emergencies don't necessarily happen weekdays during office hours, and I know that, you know, it'd be probably for you or Keith, having it in Nevada would be as accessible as having it in Ames.
Correct.
Maybe even more so.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, go to you. I just want, Melissa, was that your last question?
Yes.
Okay, okay, Lucy.
They're not on? Okay, never mind.
No.
I know this is just broad strokes, so my reply is also broad strokes. You want me to
You guys
do
just come up a
something?
little bit closer
Yeah,
here.
if you came up here, I think it would catch you.
Nobody else came up
I
closer.
I know, I should have had everybody else. come
Yeah.
up.
So,
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess we were given 3 options, and I appreciate that the county is looking countywide at this. I am on my 3rd facilities director, talking about my need for space or what my space needs are. And I understand that if you look at the auditor's office, it looks like we have a lot of space. It's not static space where I store my equipment. I also test my equipment. I have to do that publicly. I also have a lot of federal and state security laws that are getting ever more complicated. So I was concerned that security and sort of the flow in this building was not seem to be mentioned in these options at all, right? So it's not like I just take up a lot of space with my stuff. I have worked closely with facilities to secure that in a way where I have control over it, which I'm required to do, that it follows the election security policy that I'm required to have for the state, and that we can track everybody that goes in and out of those spaces. So when I look at those options, and it's just like, we'll just move the auditor's office around, because that's easy, because they use a lot of space and we need some more space. It's not as nuanced as what I saw today. I guess I thought I was brutally honest, both in person and in writing to the vendor, but that didn't seem to come across in the options I saw. So I'm hoping that there are options beyond the ones I saw today. Either nuanced options or option B, do nothing, or but the security also, not just for myself, but for my staff and for everybody in this building, I didn't see addressed, and also the way that the offices work together did not seem to be a concern for the public when they use our services. So I'm less concerned with hoteling space. That might be something that's great for the board of supervisors. But in terms of overflow space, I think we learned a lot this last 18 months with the pandemic. We have more big screens in all of our public buildings where people can go any place in the county and watch a meeting and not have to have the space here for them to physically be in. I didn't really see any of the use of technology in there, building of those rooms. We do use our conference room. We have rebuilt that to be a Zoom room, so you can meet in person and electronically or mixed. I'm really successfully a mix, which I met with, I think, 18 counties in that room and the Secretary of State. That worked out really well. So I think we should be looking at leveraging that, what we learned from COVID and how people now expect to participate in things. Again, broad strokes. Thanks.
Other comments? Just want to make sure we're not missing anyone else on Zoom that wanted to make a comment.
Oh, also one more thing. Yeah, I didn't see anything about the infill project, which has been talked about a lot in this building, or the use of the vacant lot across the street where we tore down a storage space, which is where we kept a lot of storage, but then it was moved the various buildings, so I don't know if that's something that is just on the table or if that can be folded into.
Just one minor point. In future items, we can kind of through this, the sheriff's office.
Sorry. Yeah.
They did look at the canopy area, Lucy.
talking about that for years.
Yeah. Property across the street where the annex was, to meet current city setbacks, it would be for structure, it would be like a 1,800 square foot structure. It's a corner lot, so they consider both front yards. Other than making it a parking lot, it's kind of, you know, problem.
Make it a parking lot, build in the parking lot.
That's in one of my plans. John and I actually looked at it yesterday.
Sheriff, did you have another? Yep, go ahead.
I would have a couple of points as it relates to court security. I appreciate your recognition by this group of the need for separate parking for judicial staff and for prosecutors, and we need to keep them away from the general public as they enter and exit the building. One concern I would have with the movement of juvenile courts outside the Justice Center is right now we have video monitoring and arrest alarms and a security force that's co-located and respond to anything. Moving it out, we have to figure out who we have response force and how that works. If there were any incidents, that would work.
Sheriff, did you have an additional comment? That was that, okay.
Scott, you have something. I'm sorry, Scott. Dan.
Oh, yeah.
I'm gonna make a few comments on,
Sure.
on behalf of the court, and again, seeing this the first time. Detailed responses, and I want to also collaborate with the judges who serve, so. They would make proposals. First of all, big thanks for looking at all of these. A lot of things. I would echo some concerns about moving juvenile court, from where it's currently located. A lot of infrastructure and technology in the current courtroom, obviously could be moved. As you probably are aware, we have a second court site for our magistrate court in the City Hall building. There's a specific carve out in the code of Ohio that allows that. Not sure that applies for all the other courts that are currently on the seat. How that plays out necessarily. I understand the bulk population is in Ames. But you need to extend that to, our DHA court is busier than the juvenile court. That, where are you going to stop with that? The other concern I have with essentially a third court location is we have people already going to the wrong location. This increases that problem. The wrong location, except that when they're late, it starts out. It really complicates that problem. The security is very valid. You see that. I've seen that in a couple other places where the sheriff has built a new facility away from the courthouse and those things. Fortunately, right now they're together. That's all. In regards to the large courtroom, that can help us see the associated offices and how that all interplays. Access from the second floor, obviously we have in district court judges down and use that courtroom. Larger, take down trials, for instance. Just how all that interaction would work, and the interaction with the jury deliberation room. See more detail on that. Those may be the only two issues that affected the court.
Thank you. Other folks? online that might like to make a comment? Seeing anything right now, if there are people that want to make comments, please hit your raise hand on Zoom or let me know in here. I guess the question is kind of the pros and cons are next. What are our next steps?
Well, if nobody else has got any questions, I was kind of waiting for the end.
Yep.
I have a few. You know, you mentioned restrooms and ADA. Guess, how are you considering that they're not ADA compliant? Because I go back and look through them and I find Orland Park are the only ones that are not, at least when they were built. Like Justice Center, say, the back of the house restrooms, 50% are required to be. I show on the first floor, there's 6 total restrooms, 4 of which are ADA compliant. Second floor, there's 6 total restrooms, 3 of which are ADA.
In those instances, when you have a back of house restroom.
I'm sorry, can you speak up just a little bit louder?
Sorry, when you have a back of house restroom and then a front of house restroom, it's 50% of those back of house restrooms. So you can't say that, you know, the judge is gonna come in, like the public can't come into the judge.
I'm not taking into account the public restrooms. Those are the ones in the back of the house.
They're not compliant.
What's not compliant about?
The width between the sink and the toilet, the width of the room is 5 feet, and from the edge of the toilet to the wall has to be 5 feet. So we're missing about 24 to 30 inches of width. It's just overlapping.
Is that a new regulation?
2010, I don't know if that was done in 2000, or I'd have to go back to 1991, which was the first ADA, to understand if that was the same requirement. The last time the DOJ updated it was 2010. But yeah, you're still running into a little bit of it.
Okay, and then when you mentioned the animal shelter, and that was redone in 2018. And that ADA requirements in 2018. You mentioned it was not being ADA.
We looked at the one restroom that's south of the lobby next to the sink, so if we're going down.
Yeah.
That one, I believe, was the same issue as your clearance from the sink. And I've had this call and actually consulted with the DOJ to understand, because we've run into this a fair amount, and that is one of their harder stops. And then some of the other issues that we have were minor. It's, you know, you've got a trash can that protrudes more than 4 inches. It needs to be, you know, protrude 4 inches or less for cane detection, those types of things. So those are easy fixes. And then some of them are just how you may enter the stall, as opposed to coming in one way, maybe just changing the partition type or moving the door. It's small things.
Okay.
So, the larger things would be, yes, those back of house ones and.
All right, and then for this building, you know, you mentioned with an IT facilities management, emergency management. There's other departments. Would they consider relocating, like planning and development? Would they take into consideration relocating to Ames at all?
No, and I think that brings up a good point. I think that there was a conversation about adjacencies and work overlap with engineers and board of supervisors. So when we look at adjacency to where they want to be located and who they work with in the county, we look at keeping them here. That's not to say that they couldn't be. And we talk about the advent of technology and doing those things online. I know a lot of that is processed online. They have their larger online system, so maybe that is a consideration to look at. Because they are a larger department and do see less.
I think so, for now. I think with everybody else, I think it'd be helpful to see like drawings with, you know, physical rooms and is. See what you. Try.
I have one
Yeah, go
question. So the only option I'm seeing here for the Justice Center and the county attorney's office getting any more space is completely building an entirely new addition. Not taking into account any of the work that's already been done or the money that's already been invested to make some of the changes. Is there no other option than building an entirely new space?
Their total number of office requirement, I believe, is 22. When you look at their future growth, that cannot be accommodated in their current space in any way. I don't know, are you referencing also changing the courtroom to a conference room as well? Okay, so that, what we heard from them is that space doesn't hold all their staff and is missized, and because it's a courtroom, obviously has a different change in level. So if you decide to take that as, it's a plain both sides, because if you want a grand courtroom, we only have really one location that's gonna work in the building with all the mechanics. It takes out that conference room that they're using as a conference room instead of, leveling that floor out and making it that usable space.
Because it reverts back.
Because it reverts back to courtroom. If you're looking for trying to meet the requirements of having a grand courtroom, which both county attorney and courts both ask for. So trying to balance all of those, you end up with an addition.
What are next steps?
Well, I think we got a lot of feedback today that we need to sort of go back, study, understand a little bit. We may end up reaching out to ask some questions of individuals through Joby further. But I know we're planning we assumed there would be commentary that we would need to address and look at further. And then I think our next meeting that we're trying to get on the books is towards the end of October, to try to come back with something that says, okay, here's what we heard. Here's something that tries to address the things that we can, and maybe at least have either some options or discussion, pros, cons around all of those components, and be able to try to then choose a path forward to proceed with.
Could we make just a few more comments, some things that I've heard here that I want to highlight in terms of what we get in the next few weeks? Seems to me, and you heard the same things I did, but I'm just going to go through. Seems to me that moving IT to Ames had a lot more cost than might have been anticipated, just because of all the servers, the line, network connections, all the stuff I don't understand about IT. But I'm glad that Barb brought that up, because that seems to be a huge conversation that's going to have to be had. The second one is I want to ask you a big question. Did you say, have you considered moving IRBM and keeping the shooting range where it is?
Yeah, because in their presentation, they had mentioned relocating the shooting range. And I thought that to me, in my brain, it was more practical to relocate IRBM to shooting.
Take that building that IRBM has and use it for sheriff's purposes? Is that what you're
Possibly.
We have to, the issue that we look at, the sheriff, we could use that for a classroom, for training, or for cleaning weapons, things like this. But we still have the need for a tower, for a control tower, so the primary firearms instructor on that day can be up high and oversee what's going on all across the training area.
And then that would also bring up the question of then where does IRBM go and what are their needs? And that really wasn't probably looked at, because it was assumed that the building they're in right now is sufficient. So that, if that's to be considered, I don't know how we look at that, but might need to look at IRBM needs a little more.
Juvenile, yes, it's just the yeah, and is there also is that climate control in there?
There's most of it's heated, some of it's alternating. Got some seat storage in there that is air conditioned and heated.
We can modify that.
Yeah.
Another thing, moving on, I guess, to the auditor's comments, what I took out of that is there's various kinds of storage, various kinds of security that's needed, various kinds of access that's needed. And I guess I would say storage does not equal storage, does not equal storage is a sense of, one sense I was getting. So I assumed there would be some follow-up discussion, you know, in terms of what, those types, and then what makes sense if you're going to move something, does the location make sense or not? So I think that's a huge issue. The other huge issue I heard was what are the practicalities and what's the code issues about moving juvenile court to Ames. So I assume there'll be a lot of follow-up on that issue. I did have one, again to Joby, I just wanted to say, I did have one thought about when you said consider moving, planning, and developing and environmental health. I'm thinking about the public there. Those two departments, they work together, which I think is good to know, but they also serve unincorporated areas. The optics of moving their departments that serve primarily unincorporated areas into Ames, away from the county seat, away from the center of the county, to me, I really want to think about that. And there are a lot of things that those two departments work with other people in this building. So I'm not sure I'm necessarily, I would really want to think about who they work with, who they serve, and how they serve them before I'm saying, gee, that would be an easy move. I'm not necessarily sold on that one. And the final thing I wondered about was records retention. And I hear records, a lot of records, we have a lot of paper records. Record retention is a very complicated issue because some things you can digitize, but you still have to keep the originals. Others you don't have to. I'm wondering rather if we're looking at that enough, and would it make sense for the county to hire service and temporary workers or something like that, the records that we can get rid of if we digitize, rather than continue to build or rent space for things. I'm sure that all the department heads and elected officials have done a good job of looking at that, but maybe this would be before we say we need all that space, let's make absolutely sure.
We've been working with that at the sheriff's office for the past few years, and we've been moving volunteers to come in. And the files that we have, we reduced a lot and cleared out a lot of space. The last year when COVID hit, our volunteers, we had them set aside. They're back now, and they're continuing to transfer as those files in electronic forms.
And I know thank you, appreciate that. I know the recorder's office and the auditor's office been looking at digitizing things. They probably aren't. I don't know of any of that. Any of those, either of those projects means we might need less storage of physical documents, but I just want to make sure that we're thinking about that before we continue to use space for. And I also know it's a huge project and it probably would take some outside help, but at the same time, one time to get all that stuff done as opposed, is better to me than building space that we continually have to maintain.
I agree. And I think what we've tried to, and I think we still need to be able to quantify from the officers and the department heads exactly how much of that physical space that we're seeing, that we witnessed, could be digitized, because that gives us an idea of what that real space is. I think that us maybe asking maybe more pointed question to some of those county offices and departments, what really can be removed. Like we use Joby's example, when we talk about like O&M manuals and things like that, how much of that can be kept or not, how much is online, or other things that we have. So,
yeah, we got some of it in our initial interview, but probably not enough to know exactly where everyone's headed.
Yep.
So the plan is that you'll, are you gonna work with Joby? Is that what we're gonna look at to set a new date for you to come back, and after you've had further discussions, with more information, probably another presentation or of some sort on suggestions again, and then some determination of what and where we want to go from there.
It's $1 million raise.
Oh, I'm sorry, I guess Amelia.
Thanks. No, I just wanted to echo Supervisor Merkin's concerns. I think we're pretty flexible. and planning and development and where we're located in this building. But I would have concerns about providing adequate service to the unincorporated areas if we relocate it to Ames. And also, you know, having adequate access to the public meeting room, which we use for public hearings, you know, at least twice a month.
Thank you, Amelia.
On that, I want to clarify, so we all are they focused moving facilities management?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear your question.
With this, should their focus be moving facilities management to Ames?
I'm also concerned about that because we have the majority of our buildings in Nevada.
So I'm just looking at, we need space in this building and you're shooting down moving everybody.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to compare,
That's
being realistic about it.
Yeah. I'm not sure myself. I don't know how the supervisors
Yeah.
feel.
I guess part for me is I need to kind of relook through these plans again, a little bit more detail, and then you provide you some additional feedback from myself, just where I can lay them all over and just kind of listening to everybody's thoughts too, when you're saying, hey, have you thought of this or this? Yeah, I certainly haven't made any determinations on what should go where yet. I think my questions or listening to you have been or getting your feedback and your concerns of if we were to move here, the impact it would have on who we serve and how we work with everyone else.
Thank you. I think probably would be a good point to bring it up. If anybody would like another personal meeting, move forward, reach out to me. I think Lucy, you probably need to have one based off of your feedback.
In all my spare time, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it'd be beneficial. We want to make sure that we
No, I agree.
we take all of these into consideration. So if anybody else feels that way, reach out to me and we can work on scheduling that. So we can have, it needs to be another in-person and we sit down and talk about things. Let's do that.
Hey, Joby. I know this was just a broad overview, but for areas like us and Stacy and, you know, that had break rooms, existing break rooms kind of eliminated, do we have a plan in place for how that space would be used or how we would reconfigure? I know this was just kind of a broad one for everybody, so we didn't want to get into the details of each work footprint, but I would just be interested in seeing for my specific area, if we did eliminate that work or that break room, kind of what were we planning to do with the new space? Because it was just one great big blue area. Do we have the detail anywhere?
Not at this point. At that study level, we've been looking very high level at overall efficiencies and space, square footages, and then just assessing the existing space for what kind of efficiency we see in those. So we'll have to, everyone's taking into account everyone's comments from today. We'll have to look at that further.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Otherwise, I plan that you'll work with them, Joby, to get another date set for us.
Yes.
Any other questions or comments from supervisors?
I guess I do have one more question about the second floor of the Justice Center. It's my understanding there's a lot of unused space up there. Has there been any talk about how that might be utilized or?
Where is that?
Where is that space that is unutilized?
It's my understanding there's a lot of open storage
There is not.
upstairs.
There is not.
There is a little. So I think that part of the conversations that we had, and I think maybe I need some information from you, if that's not the case, was the library. And we had talked about, you know, does it still need to be there? Can it be
physical or not, that is a lot of space. I think there looked like a break room up there that had all empty cabinets and really wasn't being utilized. And then we did have some, I don't know if that was the first floor or the second floor, a lot of those small storage rooms were full of Christmas decorations. So,
Coming up.
yeah, it is coming up. You gotta have three closets full. So I think that the question is maybe back to you, how those spaces are utilized, and if would you envision that being something else, or I think that the issue with where they're located is they still would go to the courts because I can't cross, you know. But I think it's a question of what do you need? I think that maybe sending an additional list maybe to you specifically, Scott, asking. We didn't get a definite clear breakdown of the number of chambers, how many people are traveling or not, and how that all works, who's where. And we've done that in other counties together, just to maybe understand how that all works back there. But you, at least from what we saw, you have a little bit of space.
Yeah, there's some space here and there.
Yeah, not a ton.
As far as chambers go, I think, on the second floor specifically, 3 district court judges who consider short high their home. And then use actually 4 of this. We actually use the visiting chamber as kind of a resident chamber, so. Typically, when we have up to 11 judges, district judges who rotate through story counts. Not all 11 usually do that. Same 11. 8 do. So when they rotate through, they need a chamber used while they're there. So while it looks like that chamber may be empty, it's used when a resident traveling judge shows up.
But that traveling judge doesn't need their own chamber when they travel through. They're not there very often.
While they're there.
It's kind of like hoteling, right?
Well, when they're there, but they're not all there at the same time.
Right.
No,
So-
but
There's a chamber associated with each
which
floor.
court.
Sure. Yes, but not 8 chambers required for those 8
No,
judges
no,
that
they
travel
don't.
through, right?
Not 8 chambers up.
Yeah, that's my question. What are we talking about here?
There's some other space up there. I think it's on the second floor on the, not the inside of the building, but the outside. There's something that looks like a big office, but it's kind of open and it doesn't seem to be used at all. It's probably 200 square feet.
Is that the library?
No,
It's mechanical space and storage space.
Talk about small,
Right here.
like library, workspace.
well, it looks like a workspace. There's nothing in it. No, it's
I think she's
fairly
talking
open.
about this.
There's a workroom up there.
Yeah,
That's,
who uses that?
that's printer, copier, that type of thing.
Yeah.
That's
I'm
a lot.
wondering if, Scott, would you be available sometime to go through, to do a tour through there with the consultants and talk about all the spaces?
Absolutely.
And Scott, I think it is, we went through and took, and all of you guys know that, went through it and took photographs with 360 camera. So it would be easy, we don't have to physically walk the space, we can digitally walk the space. It could even be a Zoom call, where we can click on the ones that we really think were, you know, hey, what's going on here, and then just get an answer.
Sure.
Yeah, if anything, it would be a reconfiguration because it is landlocked.
Did you look at the clerk's office as well that way? Did you do that kind of a walk through there?
We did a 360 camera as well. And
That might be worth looking at. It seemed like there were a lot of workstations in the clerk's office that aren't being used. It seemed like there was an additional space there.
When your question about digitizing records, that, you know, the reports we're trying to move forward with that, but it's not getting very far very quickly. We're still trying to get the records digitized from in Marshalltown, the tornado that was 3.5 years ago. So unfortunately, it's taking us a lot longer to get that project moving, but that is a goal of the branch, long term. But
Long term,
it's a
but
long
yes.
term project.
Yeah, because you have a lot of space back there that is just records that I don't think you need to keep anymore once you can digitize, but I know that's, you're looking at a whole lot of
It's on
stuff.
our radar, but it's just not happening as quickly as we want it even.
Yeah. Yeah, I wish there were a way that the adjacencies in that, the court and the clerk's area were different, so that if there was space that wasn't being utilized, we could utilize it for another purpose rather than building brand new office space. But I think, I think it's a struggle, and because of all the circulation issues you're talking about, but it just frustrates me. It just frustrates me to see extra space that we can't repurpose.
As I understand it, the clerk's office was designed 20+ years ago with the intent of being able to house the clerk's office for an aide with that office for their removal. So that's why there's probably space for the board.
For something that hasn't happened in 20 years.
It hasn't happened in 20 years.
So it's probably not going to, I would guess.
The city's involved in some of that. City thing.
Yeah, and the history in that relationship is, that's always useful to remember, that that's why some things are the way they are, but
Right.
doesn't make me less frustrated with it.
I hear you.
Okay.
All right. If there's nothing else, then I think we'll wrap up this meeting, and we'll just wait to hear from you, Joby, setting the next meeting after they've had the opportunity to further review some discussions today and to meet with other department or elected officials on their needs.
I'm sure people will think of things as soon as we have this meeting that we like.
Wake up in the
Should have
middle of the
said
night.
this, yeah, so, and just reach out to me, I can get the information. passed along.
So we'll have Joby as the point of contact here.
Yeah.
Pass along
I
that.
have been since the beginning, so I will keep it that way.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, I want to thank everybody for participating, good discussion.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. You guys all working hard too, so it's tough to think about what you're gonna need down the road, so. You're doing a good job, so thanks.
Thank you. Thank all of you for being here.
Thanks, everybody.
Yes, thank you.